I'm Andy from Expandly, and we globally expand e-commerce brands. Look, 3PLs overseas, there's several things you need to master. The first one, for me, is the most crucial. And the first one is communication. How are they going to communicate with you? How are you going to communicate with them? Because it's the communication piece that's the most important. Every warehouse is going to have connections with the things that you want, whether it be Amazon or Shopify, doesn't matter. You're always going to have the ability to do that in most warehouses. So obviously software is like a given. How are they going to communicate with you? How are they going to adapt to your questions? And what's the communication going to be like between you and them? Because for me, the communication is the most important part. So number one, communication. Understand how they communicate, understand how you communicate so that you can join those up. Depends on the size of brand you are and how much demand you have for the fulfillment is going to depend on how often that communication happens. So there's immediate order information. But off the back of that, it's also the other stuff. Okay, so number two, where are they located? How close to the port are they? Because you can have a very cheap warehouse, but the problem with cheap warehouses is typically they're not in areas where ports are. So you might pay less for storage, but you pay more for distribution and travel costs. So there's a way up that you need to consider based on those things. And depending on how much stock you're bringing in, it's going to depend on the margins in your product and how much margin you've got to consider with that. So locality is the second part. And the third part for all customers is obviously going to be costing. But costs are going to be relevant to your brand and understanding what that looks like. So here's the thing. You can have a generic 3PL that's going to be very generic, that does a bit of everything. Downside for your brand is that are they going to be clothing? Are they going to be supplements? What does it look like? You might want a specific 3PL that's going to focus on the areas of business that you've got. So really clear. One, you need to make sure you've got good communication. Two, the locality. Thirdly, costs, and making sure they're all in line with the margins within your product. So here's the things that most e-com brands overlook when they're expanding overseas from a fulfillment perspective. The first one is the cost of duties and VAT coming into the property, into the region in the first place. Two, shipping rates going out from the fulfillment to where they're going. You've got to be really careful about where you're shipping from and to. As soon as you start shipping over a border, the costs increase. So it's about whether you have local fulfillment versus your regional fulfillment to make that work for your brand. And then the third and final one is returns costs. The cost of the returns coming back and associated costs of refurbing them, grading them, and putting them back to stock. So three things you need to consider. One, tax and duties coming in. Two, shipping rates going out, especially cross-border. And thirdly, the returns and the work required to get them ready for sale again. The thing is with fulfillment, it isn't about regional or local fulfillment. The biggest thing that brands need to be thinking about is how their brand can go global with one provider. You need to start thinking about your brand locally in your home market, but how you take it from there and manage it overseas. And once you start taking it overseas, the biggest cost, the biggest piece to really solve is logistics. How do you get your stock globally without any stress or hassle? Now, we all know you're going to have stress or hassle whatever you do with logistics. Someone's going to put a container ship across a canal. Someone's going to start firing missiles at container ships. These things happen all the time. Control the controllables. You cannot control them. So what you need to think about for your brand is how you can work with a partner that's going to enable global expansion at the click of a button, where you have global fulfillment providers, where you've got fulfillment in every region in which you want to go to. They're the things you need to start thinking about: ease of use, ease of how you do everything. because growing a brand is tough, and we need to think about the margins. The more suppliers you work with, the lower your margins go. That's where the detail is made and the margins are made in e-commerce. Okay, let's take those two questions as very separate questions. The first one is international orders from your current provider. The answer is, until you've proven that there's demand for your products in a new region, just ship them from your current warehouse. There's no problem with that whatsoever. You need to prove demand or see demand in a new region before you send products there. It's the most cost-effective way of doing it. The problem with that I typically see is that you don't go full in on it. You're not doing ads, you don't have goods in region. So actually, although it's a good stepping stone, it's not necessarily the best gauge of, is it gonna work or isn't it? And the fact that I've turned some ads on in region, but I'm shipping from my current location, which could be in a different continent, isn't proof of concept or market. It doesn't give you a minimum viable product. All it's doing is telling you there's a bit of demand there, but what are we gonna do? So the first thing is, yes, ship overseas internationally until you've got some demand. But when you start to see demand, the most effective way is by having products in region that you can send, ideally as local as possible to reduce your margins. Then of course the question comes, how do I manage multiple suppliers, multiple warehouses with multiple logins? For some of you, what you're going to go down the route of is something like SAP. You can have this big fancy system internally that's going to link to all of the different warehouse providers that's going to cost you a huge amount of cash. That's one way of doing it, so you end up with all the documents locally. Or you can use the fulfillment provider's own software that's going to give you different software to go and log in to see everything. That's another way. The third way is to use a provider that's global fulfillment, that's just got one login that you can see everything. The choice is yours. You know, do you take the cost and burden that cost and put it in SAP? Do you have different providers that are going to enable you to have to go and log into every single piece and then try and manage that? Or thirdly, you have a global provider that's got one piece of software that's going to make that simple for you. Well, look, the first thing is that VAT needs to be included in the price. So VAT should be included in the price that they see, and it shouldn't be added at checkout. It has to be seen in the actual price in your web shop, for the want of a better word, so that that's the number they're actually going to pay. There shouldn't be anything added at the end except shipping, if that's your choice. My preferred method is to make sure that shipping is very clear on the front of what they're going to pay. Because what you don't want to do is then pay £50 for the product, they get to shipping and it's another £50 for the shipping. You need to be really crystal clear on what the shipping is up front. So make sure all of your prices are really clear in the display of where someone's going to buy your product, so they know when they get to checkout it's going to be the exact same number. International returns are always difficult. You may not have a warehouse in every single country. Let's take Europe as a great example. You're selling products in Germany, France, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, and all of a sudden you're getting returns in all of those countries. Here's the thing. What happens is that the returns to go cross-border become very, very expensive. So what you need to be able to do is get returns local in region. Best way of doing that is a solution called Easy Returns, a partner of ours, where you can get the returns sent to a local hub. And then what they do is they collate all your stuff together and then send it to your 3PL provider in region. Makes it very, very simple for you, makes it very, very easy. Because if you don't have that, one, it makes returns very, very difficult. Two, it makes them very, very expensive. And you as the brand typically are burdening all of those costs. Then what happens is that your margin in those products is just vaporizing. And you need to make sure that you're protecting the margin in your products all times. So you want to make sure that you've got regional and local setup where it's relevant and where it's right to make sure that the margins don't get squeezed, squashed, or even hammered, even worse. So returns internationally, that's why it's different. Very different to regional, local, perhaps home returns, where you can just get it sent back to your local 3PL provider or your own warehouse and deal with them there. Look, compliance is one of the most important parts you're going to have when you expand overseas. Compliance is one of those things that if you don't get right, it's going to screw every single margin and probably every single expansion you're ever going to do. There's two things to consider with compliance. One is tax, two is product. Now, both of those type of compliance things are specifically about once you've typically already expanded. But there's a huge amount in shipping compliance that you need to consider. Whenever you're working with a warehouse, you need to make sure that the warehouse understands the complexities of your products and the compliance of those products to make sure that their facilities are even compliant. Here's a great one. In the UK, we have something called the UK Government, HMRC, Fulfillment House Due Diligence Scheme. It's a scheme that is basically there to stop overseas traders trading without a VAT number. So if a warehouse operates and works with overseas clients, anyone outside of the UK as their main trading business address, then they have to be part of the Fulfillment House Due Diligence Scheme. Let's say worst case scenario. You go to a new 3PL and they're not part of the Fulfillment House Due Diligence Scheme. Here's what happens. HMRC turns up, they say, we'd love to inspect your centre. We think you should be part of the Fulfillment House Due Diligence Scheme. The owner of the business is like, what's that? Then they go around and inspect. They don't have any of the information, the stock in the right way, and any of the paperwork that was required. And they shut the business down there. They basically embargo the facility and they stop all orders being able to go out from that moment onwards. So you need to make sure that as a 3PL overseas, they've got the right qualifications, the right certification to enable your business to be able to work through it. Poor camera's going to have a heart attack. You're like this with it. It's like can't keep up.
No problem. We'll get past these.